All right, so we're going to make the little flower that we have here. And for that, we need to cut our first section of 0.8 millimeter wire. And that's what it looks like from the back. Here we go. So what we need to do is cut about 30 centimeters of 0.8 millimeter wire, and we're going to bend so roughly about halfway through the wire and try and create a 90-degree bend. And then we're going to kind of flip the wire sideways so that they kind of overlay on top of each other, in essence hiding one wire on top of the other. I hope that makes sense. So then squidge the end, technical term again, squidge the ends together. And this is going to be the stem for the flower. So it takes a bit of time, and just take your time with this. You also don't want to damage the wire, so don't squidge too hard. So next we're going to shape the first leaf, and then again you can do this in whichever direction you want. It's up to you whether you want it on the left or the right, so you can do it whichever way you want. So shape the first leaf and then bend the tip of the leaf roughly, almost doubling it back on itself, but with a little curve so that it creates like a leaf shape. And you can take your time and arrange the leaf the way you want it to look. I'm going to bring in some fine tip pliers. Now these are going to be useful for the very sharp bends we need to do in order to create a little detail on the inside of the leaf. I found you can do this with the thick pliers as well, but it's much easier when you have something fine tipped. Obviously they need to be quite strong. So these Xuron pliers, I think they're Xuron, I'm not too sure, are great for that because they're quite strong yet they have a fine tip. And then sort of 2/3 up, we are going to bend that very same wire on doubling it back on itself. You kind of twist it so that the wire lays, again like we did in the beginning, lays on top of itself. So from the front you only see one wire. I hope that makes sense. And then you obviously arrange that little detail inside the leaf until you're satisfied with the way it looks. Takes a little bit of fiddling. It's quite a fiddly section at this stage, so once you pass that it gets a little bit easier. So just arrange it until you're happy. And next we need to bring the one wire we have just used to create a leaf and bring it up a little bit to create a second leaf. You'll notice that the first wire going all the way up to the top is not actually used to make any leaf, and that is because I want the stem to be a continuous wire, so I'm only using one wire to bend from behind like that. I mean, obviously you can try and you know, modify this and see what you like. This is just the way I've done it, giving you a reference to see what you like. So I'm going to sort of fold this up, and I use my fingers, you can see here, to kind of shape the wire a little bit. You don't really need tools for that, you just use your finger, it's much easier. So when you're bending it down, it's actually better to create a little bit of a more of an angle. You can see how the leaf that I'm making here has a little bit of a rounded tip. So try and make, you know, do better than me and put a better bend in the leaf in order to get the shape better. So again, like we did with the first leaf, we're going to squidge down the base of the leaf to give it quite an acute angle, and then arrange it. There you go. And as I said, try not to mark. You can obviously later on, if you have fine sandpaper, get rid of some marks in the wire. Obviously if they're too severe you can't really erase them, but if you have any fine sandpaper, any light markings you'll be able to get rid of. So you can also, for this sort of wire, use fine tipped pliers to work with. Next, going to trim off that little detail in the middle of the leaf, and that's what it's going to look like for now rather. And you can then arrange the stem and shape it the way you like. But that's the butterfly that I've made in another tutorial, so you could make some mismatched earrings actually, which would look quite nice. But this one is for the flower. So what we're going to do next is create the little cradle for our 5mm gemstone to sit in. So you're going to have to reference it, obviously, if you're making these earrings, against another earring that you're making. So if you are creating a pair, just make sure that you maybe do 2 at the same time so that you can always reference one against the other. So bring in some round nose pliers, and you will need to create a sort of circular shape that fits the stone just enough so that it doesn't actually fall through the hole, but not so small that it doesn't allow any light to go through, if that makes sense. You obviously want a little bit of clarity and transparency, so the light to go through to show off the beauty of the stone. So make sure that the loop you are creating is just big enough to sit the stone. So I'm going to go around the pliers, and I'm going to finish the little loop by hand. So I'm going to go around until I reach a point where I then would like to create a little loop. So you're going to have to decide how you want the flower to hang, and then create a loop like I am doing here. So use a tip of your round nose pliers, and we're going to go around just once in an anti-clockwise motion. If you're going the other way, that's also fine, just whatever works for you. So like that. And we're not going to close this, so the loop is staying open because we don't want to create any bulk on that area. So next, take your stone and seat it in that cradle. And now the trick is to cover the table of the stone with the 0.8mm wire. It can be quite fiddly, as you can see, because it's so small. But once you've done it a few times, it gets easier. So kind of twist the wire on top of the flower and cover the table so that the wire itself wedges the stone in place. And you go around until you're satisfied that the stone is set. So usually about once or twice after you have created the cradle. And then I'm going to shape it. If you need to, you can shape it with your pliers. Just be very gentle and really just take your time with this. The slower and more meticulous you work in that instance, the neater it will look. And then, as I said, once you've done this a few times, it gets much easier. So next, we're going to use the leftover wire to secure the actual top, because it's a pair of earrings that can snag. So you really want to make sure that stone stays put. So what we're going to do next is just use that leftover wire to roughly loop it once around that little loop we created, and that will anchor it in place, and the stone will be pretty secure. So that's what it looks like. So once you've done that, you can then keep rearranging the little sections, and just the way the flower sits, just obviously try and not to bend the setting out of shape so that the stone will fall out. It's obviously quite secure, but you know, if you shift the wires, the stone could get loose and fall out. So just try not to shift it. So I'm arranging it until I'm satisfied. That's what it looks like. So next we need to create the little flower petals. So for that we need 3 sets of wire. So now what I've done, I don't want to use a bulky base wire, because the base wire is going to be looped around the gemstone that we have just attached. So I want that wire to be quite fine and as inconspicuous as possible. So for the first wire, I am using a 0.6, as you can see there. And then I just bring in another 0.8. I wrap around the 0.6 and the 0.8 once. Then I wrap around the 2.8s once, and then I come back down and wrap around 0.8 and 0.6 ones and start afresh with my 3 wraps around the 0.6, and then I repeat the pattern. I've added a little icon there on the side for you to see what the weave looks like, so you can repeat it. And then you just keep repeating this pattern until you're satisfied. Now I keep using pliers to push them together. Obviously the 0.6 is woven with 0.4, so it can be quite tricky. So if you keep pushing the wires together in between each sort of pyramid section, it keeps it neat and tidy. So just keep doing that until you have got enough of the sections. So for my flower, it'll be about 8 or 9, obviously depending on what stone size you use, or what kind of wire you use as well. It will depend for you. Just going to have to use that sort of method that I showed you, that I will show you just now, how to work out the circumference for your stone. So that's what it looks like. So there's 2, hope you can see there, and I'm going to create enough sections to make the flower. So next we need to create the shape, but first we need to make sure that what we have woven, the sections around the flower, actually fit. So for that, I'm just taking a random piece of leftover wire and I'm wrapping it around the flower itself, and then I'm trimming off the ends that meet at the bottom, and that way I get the actual circumference, and I can make sure that what I've made is actually big enough to fit around the flower. So I'm just comparing it against what I've already made, and that seems to be a good fit. So I think I've made about 8 or 9 of those little pyramid shapes on the weave. So next we are removing the weaving wire because there's no more need for it. As long as you've made enough to go around, you can just trim that off. And we are going to pull out the top 2 wires to give us that sort of raggedy look. So pulling the first one out, if the second one doesn't want to come out, just sort of come in halfway and trim off the wires, and that way it's easier to pull out because there's less friction. And we're left with the 0.6 millimeter wire at the bottom, which is going to be much easier to attach to our flower like so, because it's obviously finer wire and it's not quite as bulky. So we're going to wrap it, and a little bit fiddly again at this stage, so take your time with that. And I'm going around the stem of the flower roughly once or twice, just enough to make sure it's nice and secure. And then we're going to bend the flower shape around the flower itself. The sort of, I don't know what you call it. Is that the center? I'm not really sure. So bend it around the center, or I'm not really sure what you would call that. Anyway, you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm bending it around the stone. Let's call it the stone. Easier. And we are going to secure it in the same place. So I'm trying to go to as closely to the stone as possible to make sure it's the sort of surrounding raggedy bits are as round as possible. Now, because of the little loop at the back, it's not going to be as round, you know, as we'd like it to be. So you're just going to have to arrange it until you are satisfied. Obviously there's a little bit of a bulky wire section because of that loop, so you're just going to have to arrange it until you're satisfied. So just shape it. And again, my bent nose pliers, trusty bent nose pliers, I use them for everything. So push these in. What I'm doing here is I'm squashing down the wires. There's 0.6 millimeter wire against the stem of the flower because that will give it stability. And then I'm trimming off the 0.6 on one end before adjusting and attaching the other side of the 0.6 to the flower. So you can see here I'm adjusting as I go along. And then I'm just going to go around and through the closest to the stone. Put my finger over the stone so it gives me a little bit more control over when I'm pulling the wires. And then I am again wrapping this as tightly as possible around the stem. So once again, just go around. Just pull that tight. And just keep adjusting until you're satisfied with the way it looks. As you can see, it's quite a fiddly business. It does take about an hour or so to make one of these if you take your time with that. But you get better as you do them. Obviously they're so small, they're a little bit fiddly, so it takes a bit of time. And when I've made one, I always keep going back and readjusting it because I'm never satisfied. If you're anything like me, you'll probably do the same. Just going to arrange the leaves, and that's that. So that's the flower. So next we need to attach a jump ring. So what I'm doing here is separating out the little ragged edges to give it a little bit more of a flower look. So I'm taking some really fine pliers. These pliers I bought, I think they were a watchmaker's pair of pliers. They've got an extremely fine tip. Obviously you can't really use them for anything that requires to apply a lot of pressure because they get damaged really easily. And that's that. So the last thing to do here is to adjust the little loop at the back. I'm twisting it sideways so it doesn't look quite so bulky when adjusting the jump rings. And then if you use bare copper, you can live off sulphur your piece. And that's that. So thank you so much for watching. You can find me on any social media, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you have any questions or would like to partake in some really fun monthly challenges, we have a wonderful group which is called Wire Wrap and Jewelry Artists Worldwide on Facebook. So join us there, and don't forget to subscribe for more tutorials. Thank you so much for watching, and see you very soon.